Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the Sahel, somewhere between the gold dust trails of the ancient Mali Empire and the whispering libraries of Timbuktu. It's the 12th century, and above your head, the night sky stretches out like a woven indigo blanket, sewn with stars so bright they almost hum. You're sitting on a low, warm rooftop, the clay still holding on to the day's sun, while the moon, soft and swollen, climbs slowly over the horizon. There's no Netflix here, no YouTube, no light pollution, just you, the quiet, and a few wise old men scribbling on parchment by lamplight. You're not just watching the moon rise, you're watching it mean something. Timbuktu at this time isn't just a legend in school books or the punchline to the ends of the earth. It's alive, and it's a center of learning where people study the stars not for fun, but for survival, and occasionally for drama. You see, if you're a merchant trying to avoid a bandit ambush or a farmer deciding when to sow your millet, you don't check a weather app, you check the moon. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting by a young boy with enormous eyes, probably 8 or 9, whose only job tonight is to memorize what the elder says. The elder, wrapped in layers of indigo-dyed cotton, stares up at the moon like it owes him money. He's not just looking, he's measuring. He murmurs about the moon's color, shape, the exact spot it appeared relative to the brightest star overhead, likely Sirius, which West African astronomers called the Eye of the Night Ox. This isn't superstition, this is science, at least the 12th century flavor of it. The Mali and Songhai regions are buzzing with intellectual activity, much of it centered in Timbuktu and the surrounding cities. With trade routes humming through, scholars from North Africa, Arabia, and further afield drop in to exchange texts, ideas, and occasionally spices that make your nose twitch just smelling them from across the market. Books are precious here, worth more than gold, and they're copied by hand, often from scrolls that have traveled thousands of miles on camelback. And yes, some of those books include star charts and lunar tables. Mainstream fact? Absolutely. By the 1100s, Timbuktu was already home to the Sankore Mosque and University, centers of learning that rivaled anything in Europe at the time. Fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe the moon not only affected tides, which is a bit funny since Mali is landlocked, but also the personalities of newborns, depending on which moon phase they were born under. Lunar horoscopes, but make it Sahelian. You shuffle in closer as the elder begins chanting in Arabic, a remnant of Islamic learning, and then switches to Soninka. The two languages dance through the air, interwoven like the braided leather belts for sale in the morning market. The boy beside you mouths the words, trying to match the cadence, but every so often his eyes flick back up to the moon, wide with awe. You feel a tap on your shoulder. Another student hands you a piece of old parchment, camel skin maybe, and you notice a hand-drawn circle. It's not perfect, but inside it are etchings, dots, symbols, slanted lines that don't look too different than those you might see in a NASA notebook, if NASA had been funded by goats and millet instead of tax dollars. The moon's monthly phases are drawn there, labeled with poetic names: the Watcher's Eye, the Hollow Gourd, the Night Bird's Mirror. And here's where it gets really West African. Instead of dividing the lunar cycle into sterile numbers or Greek-sounding terms, the local system links each phase with animals, tasks, and rituals. A waxing moon, time to hunt guinea fowl. Waning crescent, better stay home. Bad time for travel, unless you want your donkey to get a funny foot, whatever that means. You chuckle softly. Of course, that kind of logic won't pass a peer-reviewed journal article today. But here's the kicker. Historians still argue whether some of these moon-linked beliefs were observationally accurate or just poetic metaphors passed down because they sounded nice over tea? There's no clear answer, and that's part of what makes all this so gently absorbing. Over your shoulder, someone starts singing, a low, repetitive lullaby. The moon's higher now, casting your shadow at a strange angle. It looks longer than it should. Maybe it's the slope of the rooftop, or maybe it's the magic of sitting in a place where people truly see the moon, not just glance at it between text messages. Someone begins lighting an oil lamp beside you. The flame flickers, tiny compared to the moon above. You're suddenly aware of how quiet it is. Not silent, there's the occasional bleat of a goat in the distance and the dry shuffle of wind against thatched rooftops, but quiet in a way your modern brain isn't used to, a kind of space for thought, for story. One of the elder's assistants begins unrolling a scroll from a cedar box. On it, more symbols. You don't understand them yet, but they feel deliberate. Some even look like little moons themselves, half-circles, crescents, wide-eyed spheres staring back. You lean in closer, eyes half-lidded, the heat of the day finally easing out of your limbs. The boy beside you leans in and whispers, "He says tomorrow the moon will tell us if it's time for the rain." You're not sure you believe that, but somehow, you kind of hope it's true.
You're still perched on that sloping rooftop, the baked mud warm beneath you. As the scroll is gently passed from one pair of hands to another, it creaks slightly, dry from the desert air, but holds firm, like it knows its knowledge is too old to crumble. The moon above seems to lean in too, now just a little past its apex, glowing with the faintest bronze tint. You stare up, and for a moment you wonder what it would feel like to hold it. Heavy? Hollow? Or maybe soft, like one of those sheepskin pillows the griots use to prop up their elbows when they recite the Sundiata epic for hours. A young scribe shifts beside you. His fingers are stained with ink, probably made from crushed berries and soot, and he's meticulously copying what looks like a map, not of the Earth, but of the moon. Well, sort of. You lean in. It's more metaphor than geography, but still clearly structured. This isn't just a random doodle. It's a deliberate attempt to understand the moon's face, line by line, crater by imagined crater. The drawing looks a bit like the surface of a guinea egg, speckled, oddly smooth, and yet full of secrets. One side is marked with what appears to be a lopsided mountain. The other has notches that might represent dark plains. You squint. Are those names? Yes, handwritten labels in delicate Arabic calligraphy. You point to one. The boy next to you whispers, "That's where the moon watches the Earth's sorrow." Okay, a little dramatic, but honestly, kind of poetic. This is what you've come to see. Moon maps on camel skin. Mainstream fact? These weren't just works of art. Scholars in West Africa, particularly around Timbuktu and Gao, were heavily influenced by earlier Islamic astronomical traditions. They had access to translated works by Persian and Arab astronomers like al-Farghani and al-Battani, men who mapped the heavens with serious intent. And these maps trickled south, adapted to the rhythms and metaphors of West African life. A crater here became a drinking bowl of the sky goats. A dark spot, the scar where lightning struck the heavens. Quirky tidbit? Some of these maps included not just features of the moon's surface, but imagined lunar cities. Yes, actual places, tiny civilizations that supposedly emerged under certain moon phases. According to one obscure tradition, if the moon turned them especially pale white and hung low on the horizon, that was when the silver people would dance across its fields. Harmless, of course, but also slightly judgy. And again, historians still argue whether these lunar cartographies were used for anything more than storytelling. Were they teaching tools? Did they serve ritual purposes? Or were they just the medieval equivalent of a cosmic coloring book? No consensus. And the scholars you're sitting with tonight, they're far more interested in whether the moon map matches what they saw last night during prayers. The elder clears his throat, and points at a ring on the map, circular, faintly shaded in. He calls it the resting place. No one explains further. You assume it's a metaphor for some lunar valley, but then again, it might also be a burial site. For what? You're not quite sure. The scroll gets rolled back up, and in its place, another is unfurled. This one's older, frayed at the corners, smells faintly of cinnamon and wet leather. Its markings are simpler, no calligraphy, just dotted lines arranged in spirals like ripples in a pond. A young girl, maybe 12, leans over and begins tracing the spiral with her finger. She says, "It tells time," without looking up. "By the moon, you ask?" She nods. "And by dreams." Okay, now that part sounds suspiciously like bedtime nonsense, but the spiral does seem to represent a kind of cycle, perhaps a visual calendar based on the waxing and waning of the moon. And the more you think about it, the more sense it makes. Lunar calendars were far more common than solar ones across the pre-modern world, and West Africa was no exception. You remember the elder from earlier murmuring about which moon phases are good for planting. What you're looking at now could be the actual chart he uses to decide that. Or it could be, just a really abstract drawing of a snake eating its own tail. Either way, the girl's fingertip continues circling, around and around. Her voice softens, telling you that each full moon brings a different kind of dream. One might show you a bird that flies backwards. Another, a well full of mirrors. These, she says, are clues. To what? She doesn't know. The elders say it depends on your spirit. You're not entirely sure whether to file that under astronomy or anthropology, but it's hard to look away. As the night deepens, the moon glides westward, casting long shadows of the mosque's towers across the square. You stretch your legs, standing just long enough to ease the stiffness in your knees. A dog trots by, indifferent to the universe's mysteries. Somewhere, a man coughs 3 times and then laughs. Back on the rooftop, a new discussion has begun. The scholars are trying to agree on whether last night's moon was truly the skin of milk left too long in the bowl, or merely the eye of a goat too tired to blink. Apparently, this distinction matters. You settle back into your seat, amused. Even here, perhaps especially here, there is disagreement over how to describe what is essentially the same full moon. It glows the same for everyone, and yet its meaning seems to change with every set of eyes that looks up at it. You rub your arms, chilled now by the desert breeze. The ink-stained scribe beside you has begun a new diagram. This one looks simpler, just a thin crescent with lines radiating from it like eyelashes. You nudge him gently. "What's this one mean?" He shrugs. "I don't know yet. I dreamed it." Ah, of course.
The moon, now descending into the western sky, has thinned a little since you first saw it rise. The light is softer, still bright, but no longer the overwhelming glow that lit up the rooftops. Down below, the city of Timbuktu is hushed. A few distant drums thump faintly in the night, keeping time for some private celebration, or maybe just a few night owls with rhythm in their bones. You adjust your seat, finding a comfortable dip in the clay. The rooftop feels more familiar now. You're becoming part of the furniture, like the old mat you're sitting on, or the tiny oil lamp burning low beside you. And that's when you hear them. Voices drifting up from below. Deep, deliberate, and halfway into an argument. You lean toward the edge of the rooftop and peek down into the courtyard of the Sankore Madrasa, the heart of scholarship in Timbuktu. It's not grand or showy, just a series of earthen buildings with thick walls and narrow windows, but it hums with the energy of ideas. Inside, 2 scholars are pacing in slow circles around a dusty manuscript. One is old, with a beard that brushes his chest. The other younger, fidgets with the sash around his robe. They're not talking about politics, or trade, or even theology. They're arguing about shadows on the moon. You smile. Of course they are. You descend quietly down the stone stairs, sandaled feet padding along the steps. No one stops you. You blend into the sleepy rhythm of the place, One more figure in a city that thrives on curiosity. Inside, the room smells of old ink, camel hide, and the faint sharpness of dried limes. Shelves of manuscripts line the walls, scrolls stacked next to folded folios, each one filled with handwriting, footnotes, marginal doodles. It even has a tiny sketch of a lizard in the corner, lounging beside a scribbled calculation. Because why not? You find a cushion and sit. The older scholar turns to you with a kind of theatrical sigh, as if grateful to have a new listener to convince. "You see," he says, holding up a thin parchment, "the shadow on the moon last night was not from the earth." The younger one snorts, halfway under his breath. He thinks it was a cloud in the heavens. Now your ears perk up. A cloud? In space? The elder explains, slowly, with patient hands, that the moon's imperfections must come from things between it and the stars. Celestial dust, he calls it. Invisible spirits. Possibly divine, possibly not, possibly just tired. You try to keep a straight face. The younger scholar isn't so polite. He says, everyone knows that the moon has its own features. Mountains, valleys, craters, shadows made by the shape of the moon itself. The Earth has nothing to do with it, except during an eclipse. Ah, yes, eclipses. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Mainstream historical fact. Scholars at the Sankhareh Madrasa were known to debate lunar phenomena regularly, and their discussions were often informed by earlier Islamic astronomy. They referenced thinkers like Ibn al-Shatir, and even earlier Greeks like Ptolemy, whose texts had trickled into North Africa centuries earlier. And yes, many West African scholars fully understood lunar eclipses as the Earth casting a shadow on the moon. Quirky tidbit? One particular manuscript from the region includes a bizarre but charming theory that the moon's surface features are caused by heavenly elephants stomping across its face during their invisible migrations. The theory never really caught on, but it's there, tucked into the back of a dusty codex, just waiting for someone to take it seriously. And historians still argue whether the Sankhareh scholars' lunar debates were more observational or metaphorical. Were they literal about heavenly dust, or was that just poetic shorthand for things they didn't yet understand? Did they believe in physical geography on the moon, or symbolic meaning encoded in its blemishes? You glance at the younger scholar, who now stands beside a low wooden table, tracing circles in the dust with a feather quill. He says, "We need better instruments. If I had a lens, I could see the truth." You raise an eyebrow. A lens? Turns out rudimentary magnification tools were being developed elsewhere in the Islamic world, but in Timbuktu they were rare. Scholars mostly relied on naked eye observations, memory, and extensive written logs. Some would even sketch the wound every night for a month, building crude time-lapse diagrams that look astonishingly like modern graphs, except with a lot more artistic flair and the occasional doodled chicken. You're handed a fresh cup of tea. It's strong, bitter, with a hint of mint and clove. It smells like someone wanted to stay awake just long enough to finish arguing about moon craters. The room shifts again, and now a griot steps forward. Not a scholar, not a scientist, but a storyteller. His voice is lower, slower, like warm molasses poured onto flatbread. He begins to recite a tale, one that's half history, half lullaby. In the beginning, the moon was perfect, smooth, whole, a silver bowl in the sky, unbroken. You sip your tea, settling into the story. But the moon grew curious. She came too close to the earth, wanting to hear its songs. And when she leaned down to listen, she scraped her face across the roof of the tallest mountain. The marks you see now are the earth's song, etched into her skin. Is it science? No, but it's beautiful. You finish your tea. The younger scholar is now taking notes now, copying the griot's story into a margin beside his calculations. I'm not sure if he's being respectful or just thorough. Maybe both. The old man finally nods, a silent concession that there is more than one way to understand the moon. You step back into the courtyard. The moon now is sliver above the rooftops. The wind picks up and the scent of desert herbs and distant fires clings to your robes. Above you, the stars blink, indifferent to all of it. But the moon lingers. Listen.
You wander back through the narrow alleys of Timbuktu, ducking beneath hanging baskets and lines of drying cloth, your fingers trailing along cool stone walls, still holding on to a whisper of daylight warmth. The scent of roasted millet drifts from an open window. But your attention, still moon-drawn, lifts back upward. There it is again. Gliding low now, soft and familiar. The moon. By now, you've realized that it's more than a backdrop. It's a clock, a calendar, a mood ring for the whole city. You reach a small clearing between two adobe homes where families gathered around a clay hearth. A man in a woven cap glances up and nods at you. Without a word, he shifts to make space. You sit, cross-legged, and stare into the glow of coals. Across from you, a woman slices root vegetables into a clay pot. A boy gently turns a wooden hourglass filled with fine, dark sand. They're waiting for the moon to rise just high enough. Not for magic, for timekeeping. Tonight, they're tracking the moon to know when to break a fast, or maybe to mark the day's end in a month governed entirely by the lunar cycle. You glance toward the older woman who seems to be leading the ritual. She checks a thin stick that casts a faint shadow under the moon's light. That shadow will tell her when to begin the next step in a quiet domestic rhythm older than books. Mainstream fact: much of 12th century West Africa operated on a lunar calendar, especially in Muslim communities. Religious events like Ramadan, Eid, and certain prayer times were tied directly to lunar observations. Moon watching was a civic responsibility, as well as a sacred act, often carried out with the same care you'd expect from a modern clockmaker. Quirky detail: in some regions, people believed you shouldn't point directly at the moon. It was said to cause nosebleeds or attract mischievous spirits. Instead, if you had to indicate the moon, you used your elbow, which is not terribly helpful for navigation, but undeniably polite. The boy beside you tilts his head upward. "Full in 3 days," he says confidently, like he's checking a weather app. "That's when we start the watering rotation." You look at him, slightly puzzled. He explains, each farming clan takes turns drawing from the communal well. When the moon is full, the schedule resets. The plants, okra, rice, and groundnuts, are believed to respond best to watering just before the full moon. Something about the light stirring the soil, or maybe it just helps everyone remember whose turn is when. Historians still argue whether these planting schedules had measurable effects or whether they simply helped organize agricultural communities around a shared visual cue. Either way, crops seemed to come up year after year, so no one had much incentive to argue with the moon. You glance around. In this courtyard, there's no sundial, no mechanical clock, no written agenda, but everyone knows what time it is, or more precisely, what phase it is. There's a kind of relaxed certainty to it, a trust in rhythms larger than yourself. The woman finishes stirring the pot and taps the side of the clay lid 3 times. A boy brings over a bundle of leafy greens, while another sets out bowls carved from calabash gourds. Everyone moves with calm purpose. No rush, no countdown, just the slow pulse of time, drawn from shadows and moonlight. You chew slowly on a bit of roasted yam. The skin is crisp, the inside steams faintly in the cool night air. You're not sure if it's flavored with cumin or if the braise is just playing tricks on you. Someone laughs nearby, not loudly, just enough to cause the dog under the table to twitch its ears. The old woman rises and dusts off her hands. Then she points to the moon, not with her finger, but with a graceful sweep of her chin. "That one there," she says to no one in particular, "is pregnant tonight." You look again. It's just a waxing gibbous. But in her eyes, the moon is carrying something. Maybe promise, maybe storm clouds, maybe a good fishing day. She continues, "When I was a girl, the moon would rise like that and we'd get winds strong enough to rattle the thatch off the roof." "Your roof always rattled," the man mutters playfully. She glares, "Because you never fixed it." Everyone chuckles. You sit back, belly full, eyelids drooping slightly. The moon has climbed just high enough now to cast clean shadows.
The stick in the courtyard points just barely to the west. The boy nods, then disappears down a hallway, likely off to complete whatever small task this hour demands. You think about the concept of time, not as numbers, but as texture, as shadow, as ritual. You picture a calendar that doesn't live in a box on your phone, but in the sky. Someone hands you a folded piece of paper. Inside a hand-drawn calendar, a series of crescents and circles. No days of the week, just shapes, labeled with tasks: weeding, weaving, market, milk the goats, fish dry. No hard rules, just hints. And yet, it works. Because in this world, you don't rush to meet a deadline. You move when the moon moves. You lie back on a woven mat, eyes still fixed on that waxing curve in the sky. A bat flutters overhead. Somewhere, someone is grinding millet, the rhythmic scraping carrying across the rooftops like a heartbeat. You blink slowly, lulled. The moon watches back, unblinking.
The moon has now reached the peak of its arc in the sky, just above the minaret's dome, casting a silver glow on the dusty walls of Timbuktu. You're lying flat on your back atop a mat woven with red and blue threads, soft enough to cushion the rooftop beneath you, but firm enough to remind you that you're not dreaming. Yet. From a nearby window, a voice begins to drift upward, high, gentle, and melodic. It's a lullaby, but not just for children. You recognize the cadence. This is a myth song, one of those soft-spoken tales whispered under the moon to lull families into sleep or slip them gently into another kind of knowing. The song speaks of a rabbit on the moon. No surprise there. Lots of cultures have seen a rabbit in the moon's shadows. But in this version, the rabbit is a messenger, not of gods, but of the moon itself. Every full moon, he comes down from the sky carrying tiny folded messages in his ears, advice for farmers, dreams for mothers, secret names for newborns. You smile, listening. It's charming, and just ridiculous enough to feel right at home here. A woman, sitting beside you in the shadows, her scarf silvered by the moonlight, leans closer. The children love that story, she says. But the real myths, the ones we keep quieter, those are for older ears. You turn toward her, the air between you thick with spice and story. Which myths? You ask. She raises an eyebrow, as if deciding how much you're ready to hear. Then she begins. The moon, she says, wasn't always the moon. Of course it wasn't. Mainstream historical fact. In many West African oral traditions, the moon wasn't simply a glowing object in the sky. It was often personified, gendered, or even believed to be a traveling spirit. Among the Mande-speaking peoples, the moon is sometimes portrayed as a shy being, hiding behind clouds or ducking away from prying eyes. Other stories tell of jealous suns, fallen stars, and moons that once walked the earth. Quirky tidbit. Some variations of a Songhai tale describe the moon as the abandoned lover of the earth. They were once one being, but during a long-ago quarrel, probably about whose turn it was to cook, they separated. Now the moon circles endlessly, trying to get the Earth's attention. And eclipses? That's when they briefly make up, before going their separate ways again. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect actual cosmological belief systems, or if they were simply metaphorical frameworks for teaching social values, like patience, loyalty, and forgiveness. Either way, they clearly made an impression. The woman's voice is slow, like honey dripping from a spoon. In the old days, she says, when the moon was low and red, people believed it was tired from wandering. We would leave out water bowls to cool it down, sometimes milk. You glance upward, half expecting to see a bowl in the sky. And the moon used to sing, she adds. When it passed overhead, you could hear it, if you were very quiet and your heart wasn't too noisy. You're tempted to laugh, but you don't. You're too deep in the spell.
Even the animals would hush, especially the night birds. They know the moon better than we do. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. And sure enough, not a single bird call pierces the night. She pulls from her robe a small carved object. It's smooth and cool, shaped like a crescent. A moon charm, perhaps ivory or bone, or some old piece of driftwood polished by years of handling. My mother gave it to me when I first bled, she says, tucking it back away. We wear the moon when our own moon rises. You understand, in a quiet, respectful way. The moon, in many cultures, West African included, has long been associated with femininity, cycles, protection, and mystery. It's both a clock and a confidant. And for centuries, these gentle myths served as both lullaby and lesson, especially for women, whose voices were often absent from the scrolls, but alive in the stories. A child stirs nearby. The woman touches your arm, nods toward the moon. She's listening, she says. You lie back again. It's easy to see why the myths endure. The moon does heal alive, constant, yet always changing. Familiar, yet unknowable. A character in the sky, silent and endlessly watching. And somehow, it makes you feel watched over, not watched. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena calls out. Not a threatening sound, more like a laugh, a reminder that the world is still turning, even as you drift. A breeze brushes across your cheeks. The fabric of the mat rustles softly. The woman beside you hums the same melody as before, but now slower, more personal. The kind of song you hum to yourself when no one else is listening, or maybe just when the moon is. Above you, the face of the moon seems to shift. You swear it's grinning now. Probably just the wind in your ears, warping sound and thought into something gentler. But still, you smile back. The moon myths are soft stories, never shouted, never written in stone. They live in breath, in gesture, in songs hummed into sleeping ears. And as you listen, you feel time stretch, not vanish, just slow, like a rabbit's heartbeat in a field of silence.
The moon has dipped slightly now, brushing the edges of the rooftops like a tired candle melting toward morning. You're walking again, slowly, feet brushing through the soft dust between stone walls. The alleys here narrow and widen without warning, and the wind finds its own quiet paths ahead of you, curling past half-shuttered windows and rustling dried leaves hung to ward off ill luck. You're headed toward the edge of the city, where the buildings thin and the low grasses of the Sahel begin to show their wiry spines under moonlight. There, under a sloping acacia tree with branches shaped like cupped hands, you find them. 2 men in loose robes, one older, the other with a shock of dark braided hair, hunched over a bundle of herbs tied together with a bit of red string. They are marabouts, healers, spiritual advisors, and the keepers of knowledge too messy for books. They glance up as you approach, and the younger man nods toward a woven mat beside a clay jar. You sit without speaking. The air smells thick with the scent of dried bark, pepper, and ash. Somewhere behind them, something is boiling over a low fire, releasing a sharp tang that tickles the inside of your nose. You've stepped into the world of medicine men and moonlight. The elder pulls out a carved stick, curved at the end like a shepherd's crook, and uses it to stir the herbs. The younger man, meanwhile, turns his attention skyward. We're waiting for her to lean west, he says, not looking at you. Her? The moon. She listens better when she's on her way out. You tilt your head. So even medicine has its schedule, governed not by hours, but by the tilt of a celestial head. Mainstream fact: in many parts of 12th century West Africa, lunar cycles were closely tied to traditional medicine. Healers timed certain rituals, preparations, and even diagnoses according to moon phases. A remedy given on a waxing moon was believed to grow strong within the body.
One given during waning, it helped the illness fade. Quirky tidbit? Some healers swore that root vegetables pulled during a full moon screamed silently, releasing their pain into the night. That's why roots for medicine were always dug during a crescent, when the moon's light wouldn't catch them watching. The elder Marabout begins to speak, voice soft but assured. When a child is born, we look at the moon. You nod. That part makes sense. If it's a crescent, they'll be clever, but moody. If it's full, they'll speak many languages. If the moon is hidden, he taps the side of his head. Quiet. Inside their own mind. Accurate, you ask? He shrugs. Sometimes. But it helps the mothers sleep. That matters too. You glance at the jar now, cooling beside the fire. The younger man lifts it carefully and pours a thin, dark tea into a clay bowl. He hands it to you. It smells earthy, like something between wet stone and burnt honey. Don't drink yet, he says. Let her see it first. You hold the bowl toward the moon. A ritual, perhaps. Or just courtesy. Then you sip. It's bitter. Deeply so. But not unpleasant. There's a rootiness to it that sits heavy on the tongue like it's anchoring you to the ground. This one is for dreams, the younger healer says. It's made with kinkaliba and a little dried baobab bark. You nod, though the flavor has turned a little citrusy now. We only brew it 3 nights a month, he continues. Nights like this. You glance up again at the moon. Still hanging, still glowing, now with the gentleness of a lantern at the end of a quiet path. Historians still argue whether the association between moon phases and traditional medicine had any observable effects, or whether they were rituals meant more for the mind than the body. But even now, sitting with the tea warming your chest, you can't help but feel something align. Maybe it's placebo, maybe it's centuries of belief weaving comfort through the air. The elder Marabout finishes grinding a bundle of dried leaves into powder, then sprinkles them in a slow spiral across the mat. For protection, he murmurs. From what, you ask? He shrugs. Not everything needs a name. The fire pops softly behind you. The younger man leans back and points to a tiny bowl painted with lunar phases around its rim. During a blood moon, he says, we lock away the sharp things. You raise your eyebrow. It's just tradition, he adds quickly. The energy's too wild. You can cut a thread and end up unspooling more than cloth. Another mystery, half explained. But that's the rhythm here. No full answers, just gestures, scents, shadows, and quiet moonlight. You rise slowly, handing back the bowl, your limbs relaxed, your breath a little deeper. The bitterness of the tea lingers on your tongue, a reminder of something too old for translation. As you walk away, the Marabouts do not watch you go. They're already turning back to their fire, to their herbs, to the moon. You glance back once, catching sight of the older man holding his hand to the sky, palm up, as if weighing the moon itself. Back on the path, you pass a woman with a sleeping child on her back, walking barefoot, murmuring something low and steady into the baby's ear. You catch just enough to understand. She's telling the child to rest, because the moon is watching, and she never lets bad dreams cross her light. You believe her.
You follow the wind now. Not a gusty thing, but a low whisper that teases the back of your ears and beckons like a lazy song. It carries the scent of river water and something sweeter, figs maybe, or pressed date paste wrapped in leaves. Your feet guide you downhill, the path gently sloping toward the shores of the Niger River. The night here is dense, velvety, and full of secrets. You find yourself at the river's edge, where dugout canoes rock gently in the shallows, tied to tall wooden poles sunk into the mud. Moonlight scatters across the water like broken glass, and frogs trill somewhere nearby. There's movement on the bank. A circle of students sitting cross-legged around an older man with a beard that stretches almost to his chest. His robe is simple, but his voice carries weight, deep and round like a drum spoken softly. This is the madrasa, a quiet seminary under the stars, where lessons unfold not from books, but from lips and memory. Tonight's topic? The movement of the moon across the zodiac, and what it might mean for kings, markets, and fishermen. Mainstream fact? By the 12th century, Islamic astronomy had spread deep into West Africa, particularly through centers like Timbuktu, Gao, and Genet. Scholars here didn't just memorize lunar cycles, they analyzed them, copied star charts from Arabic manuscripts, and debated their meanings late into the night. The teacher draws a line in the dirt, then another and another, until there's a rough circle with 12 slices like a celestial pie. He places a smooth white pebble at one edge. "Tonight she sleeps in Gemini," he says. You furrow your brow. Gemini? Oh yes, many of the lunar calendars here were syncretic, blending Arab astrological systems with local seasonal lore. The signs might have familiar names, Leo, Taurus, Cancer, but their associations had a distinctly West African flavor. In Gemini, that was a good time to gather honey, begin a journey, or repair your sandals. Scorpio? Keep an eye on your goats and don't trust sweet-tongued strangers. Quirky tidbit? One surviving Fulani manuscript from the 13th century features illustrations of the moon with human eyes and a row of teeth smiling down at little horned cows. Scholars still aren't sure whether it's meant to represent a deity, a weather omen, or just a very fanciful nighttime doodle. You sit cross-legged with the others, watching as the teacher places tiny objects, beans, stones, carved figures, into each wedge of the circle. It's not divination, not exactly. It's memory work. Each object anchors a story, a rule, a proverb. The students repeat them under their breath. Moon in Taurus, plant with care. Moon in Leo, watch your tongue. Moon wanes, and so should arguments. The repetition is gentle, lulling. You could almost doze here with your back against a warm patch of sand, the river whispering in one ear and the stars murmuring in the other. The teacher says, suddenly, historians still argue whether these were tools for understanding the heavens or tools for understanding people. He raises an eyebrow at his students. You must decide which matters more. There's a quiet, and then a boy near you asks, but why 12 signs? The teacher smiles. Because 13 would feel like a mistake, and 11 is too lonely. A few students chuckle. The boy scratches his head. You suspect he'll remember the answer anyway. As the lesson winds down, the students gather the objects back into a cloth pouch. The teacher takes the white pebble, representing the moon, and places it back in a small wooden box. He blows gently over the top and snaps it shut. The moon herself is drifting lower now, her edges a little blurrier. She's not tired, she never is, but you can tell she's ready to let the stars have their moment. You rise with the students, dusting off your robes. One girl turns to you and asks, "Do you dream with your eyes open or closed?" You blink. She shrugs. We're learning both ways. The river path is cool beneath your feet as you wander back toward the city's low lantern glow. You pause once at a fig tree where a man is gently scraping bark into a bowl with a curved knife. For ink, he explains, nodding toward the wooden tablet resting at his knee. What will you write? He glances up. Moonrise times, so no one's late. Then, with a faint smile, also a love poem, because even she, he points to the moon, has her flings. You leave him to it, stepping quietly past goats curled in their pens, past sleeping children with arms flung wide as if dreaming themselves into flight. The city is dim, still wrapped in a blanket of its own breath. Somewhere, far from your view, the moon slips one more degree across the zodiac. And perhaps a scholar notes it. Perhaps a lover sighs. Perhaps a fish beneath the surface of the river shivers, feeling the pull. All of them following her. Patiently, curiously, sleepily.
The city is sleeping, but you are not. Not quite. There's a rhythm here you've begun to sense, like the quiet inhaling and exhaling of stone and clay beneath your feet. You follow it now, deeper into the winding alleys, where torches have given way to oil lamps, and oil lamps to the soft glow of coals left from evening fires. The stars above feel closer than they should be, leaning in to listen. You round a corner and find yourself standing before an open-air courtyard, circular, ringed with clay benches, and occupied by a handful of figures in the deep navy robes of the Sonenke scribes. They're passing around a scroll made of animal hide, inked in the curling loops of a jami, Arabic script used to write African languages like Sonenke and Pular. One of them beckons you over. "We're calculating the moon's rising," he says simply, as though this is something one naturally does on a Wednesday evening in the 12th century. Mainstream historical fact? In West Africa during this time, the Islamic calendar, with its reliance on lunar sightings, was vital for both religious and civic life. But this wasn't a passive observance. Local scholars developed techniques for predicting moon phases, constructing lunar tables, and sometimes even correcting imported astronomical texts with observations drawn from their own skies. One scribe gently taps a polished wooden rod across the scroll, his lips moving silently. Another beside him fingers a string of beads, counting off the nights since the last confirmed crescent. A third consults a circular device carved from bone and fitted with wooden pins. It looks for all the world like a divining toy, but no, it's a lunar calculator, passed down from teacher to student like a family heirloom. Quirky tidbit? Some West African scholars in this era recorded accounts of moon twins, instances where the moon was said to split or appear doubled in the sky. Theories ranged from dust storms playing tricks on the eye, to divine messages, to mirages caused by heat rising from the Sahel. One particularly poetic document described the event as the moon speaking to itself, lonely and longing. You take a seat among the scribes, careful not to disturb their rhythm. The courtyard is hushed, save for the occasional scratch of charcoal on hide and the soft clinking of beads. One man hums a melody under his breath, tapping a steady rhythm on the edge of the bench. Tuk, 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 like a metronome for celestial thought. He says at length, "We calculated the moon's rising. It's still argued in history whether our predictions came from imported science or from centuries of staring at our own skies." He smiles and gestures upwards. Perhaps both. The sky belongs to all who look up long enough. Someone offers you a date soaked in honey. You take it, and as the sweet warmth floods your mouth, you remember the teacher from earlier. Moon in Gemini, good time for sweetness and repairs. Another scribe clears his throat. "We think the next crescent will appear just above the baobab tree near the market square, third branch from the top." You glance at the others, but no one laughs. This is not guesswork. This is knowledge, meticulously gathered, lovingly preserved, often sung aloud so it sticks in the mind like a lullaby. They show you a small folded manuscript, no larger than your palm. It contains verses, part prayer, part calendar, meant to guide the eyes and soothe the spirit. The paper smells faintly of clove and goatskin. You whisper the words under your breath. If the moon hides, wait. If she delays, still wait. The tide of time is gentle, but never late. There's something comforting in this patience, this idea that you don't force the moon to appear, you simply prepare a place in your night for her. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance, confused perhaps by the bright moonlight, or simply eager for the first hint of dawn. One of the scribes stands and stretches, arching his back until it pops. "We'll check again before Fajr. Until then, may your dreams be steady." The others echo the phrase, "dreams be steady," and begin packing their tools. You watch as they roll the scroll carefully, bind it with red twine, and place it in a wooden chest already half full of such treasures. As the courtyard empties, you linger a moment longer. There's a warmth in the air still, and you can almost imagine the moon herself watching from above, curious what these men with their scrolls and counters and bone circles are saying about her. You whisper toward the sky, "They think you're brilliant." The moon says nothing, of course. She just keeps drifting. But maybe, just maybe, her light flickers a bit more playfully, like someone trying not to smile. You rise and walk the quiet streets again,
soothed by the hum of a city that listens to the heavens with such care. Somewhere, someone is stirring lentils over a coal fire. Somewhere, someone is composing a poem that no one will read, but everyone will remember. Somewhere, a baby is awakening for the first time under moonlight, blinking up at her wide-eyed sister in the sky. You pause to look once more. Still there, still perfect, still on time.
The air shifts as you walk westward, where the stone dwellings become less clustered and the landscape opens into scattered homesteads surrounded by fenced gardens. The horizon is low and wide here, making the stars feel like an embroidered curtain just barely out of reach. You rub your eyes and blink. It's deep night now, but there's still movement. Not hustle, not bustle, more like the gentle rustling of lives in rhythm with cycles older than clocks. A faint bleating sound reaches your ears. Goats, perhaps? You follow it, only to find yourself approaching a low structure with a thatched roof, shaped almost like a beehive. Inside, the dim flicker of a lantern glows gold against the earth walls. And there, seated cross-legged on a woven mat, is an elder woman stirring something thick and dark in a shallow bowl. Her arms are strong, her fingers stained with what looks like ink. She nods at you. Come, you want to know what the moon says about the body? Of course you do. She gestures to a series of gourds hanging from the ceiling, each marked with a symbol. Some look like stars, others like eyes or fish. She marks them with lunar signs, for brewing medicine or for knowing when not to touch the liver. The moon has rules for all of it. Mainstream historical fact: across many West African societies, medicine and astronomy were often intertwined. Practitioners, often women, relied on both empirical knowledge of herbs and intuitive systems based on lunar or solar cycles. The moon was thought to influence not just tides or planting cycles, but the human body. Swelling, bleeding, fevers, fertility. Lunar calendars sometimes doubled as medical guides. She dips a carved spoon into the bowl and lets a stream of black syrup fall back into the mix. This is made under a waning moon, to draw things out. Good for sickness that hides. You ask what's in it, and she chuckles softly. Too many things. Some of them you wouldn't believe. Snake root, burned coconut shell, the spit of a child born at dawn. You're not sure if she's teasing. That's half the point. Quirky tidbit: some traditional West African remedies involve timing treatments with lunar eclipses, believed to be moments when spiritual forces were exposed or weakened. There are even accounts of moon fasting, where certain foods were avoided or favored depending on the moon's phase. She opens a small basket and pulls out a bundle of dried leaves tied in red thread. These are only for full moon use, she warns. Brewed any other time, they make you dream too much. Too loud. You run your fingers along the leaves. They smell of pepper and dried rain. In another basket are polished stones, black and cold, kept in water for cooling fevers, but only set under moonlight to recharge. Historians still argue, she says suddenly, whether this is science or belief. But what do they think belief is made of? She doesn't wait for an answer. Instead, she draws a line in the dust with her spoon and gestures for you to lie down. Put your head here. You'll feel the pull. And oddly, you do. Maybe it's the rhythm of her stirring. Maybe it's the hush of her voice as she begins to chant something in a language older than your own memory. Maybe it's the way that moonlight filters through a crack in the wall and lands right on your forehead. She says, people forget that we're mostly water too. She tells you about ailments of the mind treated with moonflowers soaked in milk, about skin conditions salved with ground pearl only if the moon is waxing, about how babies born during eclipses grow up dreaming in twos, always watching themselves from the outside. You blink slowly. Her voice is velvet. You are not asleep, but something softer. She takes your hand and presses a warm stone into your palm. This one keeps your chest from closing when you wake. You thank her,
unsure if you mean physically or emotionally. Maybe both. There's a lull. The goats bleat again, and this time you hear a child giggle in the distance. Light as a spark, gone in a moment. A breeze stirs the thatched ceiling. The woman leans back. "You're lucky," she says, dry but amused. "You didn't come on a moonless night. On those, even the stones refuse to speak." You sit up slowly, as if rising from under a blanket of stars. She's already turned back to her stirring, the dark medicine glinting like spilled ink. You know better than to ask for more. This isn't a show. It's just life. Lunar wrapped and lovingly quiet. You step outside into the stillness. The moon is bright now, so bright that it throws faint shadows. The dirt path ahead gleams silver, and the air is thick with the perfume of damp earth and crushed leaves. You begin walking again, stone in hand, head strangely lighter. Somewhere owls call. Somewhere someone is holding a bowl of bitter root tea and praying for the fever to break. Somewhere the moon watches over it all, silent, distant, and strangely familiar. And behind you, the stirring continues. Slow. Deliberate. Moon-blessed.
The sky has shifted again. The stars have rotated in their velvet patterns, and the moon now hangs lower, golden, as if aging toward dawn. You find yourself at the edge of the settlement now, where desert sands press up against human intention and structures grow sparse and solemn. Before you lies a worn path, a trail of old boot prints, goat hooves, and smooth cartwheel grooves etched into the earth like memory. You follow it without knowing why, drawn, perhaps, by the pull of a journey rather than the promise of a destination. A figure sits ahead on a low dune, cloaked in indigo. His turban is wrapped high and wide, the end trailing behind him like a comet's tail. Beside him, a leather pouch and a bound book, its edges darkened from desert travel. He turns slowly as you approach. "Looking for a story?" he asks without preamble. His voice is parched, like wind over stone. You nod. Always. He pats the ground beside him. "Sit then. But no, this story doesn't end. It loops, like the moon." You sit, and he opens the book not to read, but to show you. Inside are maps, not of terrain, but of belief. You see concentric circles, lunar phases, winding trails labeled not with place names, but with events. First betrayal, night of the hidden moon, time of 3 lights. Traders, especially those bound for places they might never return from, watched the moon like it was a gatekeeper. If she shone clearly, it meant safe passage. If she flickered, you stayed. If she vanished, you prayed. Mainstream historical fact? West African trade caravans during the 12th century didn't just rely on physical tools like astrolabes or compasses. They employed cultural astronomy, using the moon and stars to guide routes, time rests, and even gauge spiritual readiness for journeys. These patterns, passed down orally, blended geography, cosmology, and myth. The man pulls a piece of polished quartz from his pouch and holds it up. It catches the moonlight and refracts it into his eye. They believed the moon could warn you, or mark you, that those who journeyed under certain moons would carry that light forever. You glance down at the map again. Some paths are labeled lunar roads, others lost under eclipsed sky. Quirky tidbit? Some desert guides, called Dankali in parts of the Sahel, use the moon's position not just for direction, but to calculate distance in days. One legend claimed the moonwalkers, elite guides who could read the subtle shifts of shadow over dunes, could catch a moonbeam in their hand and fold it like paper. He reaches into his robe and withdraws a piece of folded parchment. On it, a poem. "We left with the moon on our shoulders. We returned with the dust in our peath. The moon remembers even when we forget.
She writes our footprints in her book. You sit silently, the wind brushing your face like pages turning. He points toward the western horizon, now bleeding faintly into color. That way, to the ocean, past the salt plains, past the river of ghosts. You ask, "Have you been?" He shakes his head. "No, but I've dreamed it," and the moon says, "That's almost the same." Then he looks at you, serious now. "They will tell you we didn't chart the stars. We borrowed our maps, that we wandered, but we didn't wander. We waited, we listened, and the moon told us when." The wind picks up, carrying with it the smell of something ancient, smoke and sweat and old prayers. You ask if the moon ever lied. He smiles, slow. "No, but we lie to ourselves about what she shows us." The eastern sky is paling now. The moon begins to lose her edge, like chalk smeared by a finger. You realize this is nearly over, your night among these soft, brilliant minds, but somehow it feels like the real journey is just beginning. The man stands, brushing sand from his robes. "Go back now. The stories always loop. You'll find them again." You ask his name. He shrugs. What does the moon call herself? She doesn't say. She just shows up. And with that, he vanishes over the dune, leaving only a few faint prints in the sand and the sound of wind where words used to be. You sit alone for a while longer, the leather map in your lap, the quartz still catching light. Above you, the moon dips low, quiet, ancient, and utterly unbothered by what anyone believes about her. You whisper a quiet thank you, not because she demands it, but because somehow it feels right. Then you arise and begin the walk back through the sleeping city under the final gaze of the moon.
The path home is quieter than you remember. Even the goats seem to sleep more soundly now, bundled into their thatched pens like tufts of cotton. The domed rooftops glint silver as the sky shifts from indigo to a dull steel blue, that in-between time when night hesitates to leave. You pass the same clay walls and cracked wooden doors, but everything feels different, softer, slower, as if the entire city has exhaled. In the distance, a low drum sounds once, then again, a morning call. Somewhere, water is poured into a metal pot. A baby cries. A rooster, half-hearted, attempts his first crow of the day. But the moon is still here, lower now, nearly touching the horizon, and slightly hazed. She glows not with power anymore, but with memory, like the last flicker of a candle just before it gives itself to smoke. You turn one last time. From here, the city is dreamlike, books stacked like sleeping towers, stone walls cradling wisdoms long dismissed, and people, real, imagined, or somewhere in between, who charted their lives not by conquest, but by light, gentle, rhythmic light. And above them, always, that moon, not worshipped, perhaps, not even fully understood, but trusted, observed, spoken to. Mainstream historians still debate how much of this was astronomy, how much was myth. But here, in the quiet echo of those desert halls, it's clear those categories never mattered much, because the moon didn't need to be understood to be honored. She only needed to be noticed. She still does. So you take one last breath, deep and full of dust, stories, ink, and old roots, and you carry it with you, not just as a memory, but as a rhythm, because the moon is not just something to look at. She's something to move with. And as you walk away, head tilting instinctively to the sky one more time, you can almost hear her. Softly, gently, I remember. With faint desert wind and the echo of an ancient voice saying, "We didn't measure time. We traveled with it." You lie on a woven mat, placed carefully atop a rooftop terrace, the kind built flat and wide so that desert families can sleep beneath the stars on sweltering nights. The mat is rough beneath you, made from raffia palm or maybe woven goat hair, its fibers tickling the backs of your arms as you stretch out beneath the open sky. The night is still young. A dry wind sighs across the rooftops, and from a nearby courtyard comes the faint click of beads and the soft hum of a prayer being whispered into fabric. But all your attention is fixed upward, to the moon hanging low and watchful, and to the students arrayed around you, some squinting through bronze sighting tubes, others adjusting stones on a carefully measured grid drawn in sand. This is a lesson, though not the kind taught in neat rows and memorized lines. Here in 12th century West Africa, astronomy is a living thing. It isn't fenced off behind dusty walls or reserved for the elite. Instead, it blends into daily life in the alignment of houses, the timing of travel, and the orientation of mosques. A bearded elder leans over you now, placing a smooth pebble onto one corner of the grid. That one, he says gently, is where the moon rose last at the solstice. His voice is slow and certain, each word pronounced as though it's been passed down through many mouths. To your left, a younger student giggles as her pebble rolls out of place. She adjusts it with the care of someone placing the final piece in a board game. Their measurements are not perfect, not by today's GPS-driven standards, but they are deeply intentional. Every stone marks a moment in time, a rising moon, a hidden eclipse, a vanished star once charted on camel parchment. The tools are simple: sticks, string, smooth stones, a straight wooden frame, and yet this is sacred geometry, not in the Da Vinci Code sense, but in the quieter, older rhythm of people who noticed patterns and built meaning into them. The number 7 recurs again and again, not just in days or weeks, but in the ways scholars divided the sky. 7 segments between important lunar positions, 7 stones for each known planet, and sometimes 7 breaths held in silent prayer before beginning a night's observation. Historians still argue whether these patterns came from Islamic influence, from indigenous traditions, or from something older still, fragments of Nubian cosmology carried westward by merchants and pilgrims. The debate continues, as most things in the desert do, slowly, patiently, without certainty. But here on the rooftop, under this moon, the debate doesn't matter. What matters is the hush, the way no one speaks while the moon crosses a line they drew in the sand an hour ago. What matters is the collective breath, the way everyone's body leans ever so slightly forward, listening, not with ears, but with the whole self. And it's not just students. You notice a few older women sitting in the shadows, not officially part of the lesson, but present nonetheless. One knits slowly, her fingers looping dyed yarn into spirals. Another hums a melody that matches the rhythm of the pebble placements. Perhaps they've come to remember, or perhaps they've never forgotten. A teenage boy, brimming with pride, explains to you how one of the stones marks where the moon will disappear during the next eclipse. He points to a tiny etching in the corner, a date. It's written in a blend of Arabic script and local markings, a reminder that language here is flexible, flowing like the Niger River around unfamiliar words. You ask him how they predict eclipses without metal clocks or telescopes. He shrugs, he says, simply. We count, and we remember. Indeed, memory here is a form of astronomy. Old griots speak of past eclipses the way a modern historian might speak of wars. Ah, yes, the red moon that frightened the chickens but not the goats. That was during the reign of King Musa's uncle. In the middle of the mat sits a low wooden board, ink-stained and chipped at the edges. Atop it rests a hand-carved compass, not quite precise but deeply cherished. Around it, students take turns drawing circles, practicing arcs, adjusting the angles between stones. One girl leans back, arms behind her head, and traces a constellation with her fingertip in the sky. Her version has fewer stars than the ones you might know, but more meaning. Each point a story. Each story a map. You begin to notice that the moon here is not just a body in space. It's a clock, a diary, a song. Its phases help farmers predict planting, help parents prepare for childbirth, help travelers gauge how far they'll get before the heat returns. It is also a storyteller. Its face changes, its color shifts, sometimes it hides. Sometimes it glares. The elders speak of it as a trickster, not malicious, but definitely not simple, like a grandparent who tells half a joke and leaves you to figure out the punchline a week later. And as the moon dips closer to the western horizon, casting long shadows that dance over your mat and across the gridded sand, a soft chant begins, not in unison, but in overlapping murmurs. It's a kind of moon prayer, but without plea, no requests, just acknowledgement. You join in without knowing the words. It doesn't matter. The tone is enough. A dog barks somewhere in the alley below. A sleepy one-note flute joins the breeze. And all the stones begin to glow just slightly whiter, as if the moon herself approves of tonight's arrangement. Then the elder speaks again, this time not to you, but to the group. We measure not just the moon's path, but the path she makes in us. And for a moment, you believe it.
The morning comes, not with blaring horns or alarms, but with the subtle creak of wooden shutters, the coo of doves, and the rustle of linen garments brushing against clay walls. You rise slowly, the rooftop mats still warm beneath your back from the night's lingering desert heat. The moon has dipped below the horizon, retiring for the day, but her presence lingers, like the aftertaste of honeyed tea. You stretch, bones popping like millet in a pan, and follow the scent of porridge down to the courtyard below. There, a copper pot simmers over embers, and a woman stirs its contents with the practiced rhythm of someone who's been doing this longer than the sun's been up. She glances up and says with a smirk, "Dream well, moon watcher?" You nod, but your thoughts are still on those pebbles, those careful alignments, that soft chant that wound its way into your sleep. The household is beginning to stir, but it's not a chaotic scramble. Rather, it feels like gears slipping into place, slow, methodical, deliberate. And this, too, is part of astronomy here in West Africa, not just in the stars above, but in the cadence of life below. Today, you're told, is a special day, not because of a festival or a birth or a market gathering, but because today is what the elders call a lunar memory day, a day marked on local calendars when a particularly rare lunar position is believed to subtly affect decisions, moods, and even the success of long journeys. No fireworks, no rituals, just a quiet observance, the kind you'd miss if no one whispered it to you over porridge. You spend the morning walking with a local scholar through alleyways lined with mud brick homes. His name is Abdu, and he wears a faded indigo robe streaked with dust and chalk from his lessons. He talks as he walks, pausing only to greet passers-by with the kind of familiarity reserved for a village elder or a barber who's seen everyone's scalp. Abdu points upward toward the empty blue sky and says, "We don't only watch the moon when she's full, we watch her when she's not there too. That's when she's quietest, and quiet moons reveal the most." You squint, puzzled. Reveal what? He grins. Patterns, mistakes, secrets. According to Abdu, some of the most important lunar knowledge in this region was gleaned during new moons, when there was nothing to look at. You'd sit under the night sky and study its absence, comparing notes to the days when the moon was full and bright. It sounds counterintuitive, like trying to understand a friend better when they've gone silent, but it makes a strange kind of sense. Historians still debate whether our ancestors marked lunar voids for spiritual or agricultural reasons. Some say both. I say, and here he taps his temple, they just paid better attention than we do. You step through an archway into a shaded inner courtyard, where several parchment scrolls are laid out on a reed mat. These are lunar charts, you're told, passed down for generations. Their ink has faded, their corners gnawed by time and mice alike, but the patterns remain. Some are simply drawings, arcs and crescents arranged like the phases you'd see in any textbook, but others are stranger. One, for example, contains no moon symbols at all, just dots and dates and the occasional small drawing of a frog, a mango, or a bent walking stick. You raise an eyebrow. What are these? Dream signs, Abdu says casually, as though that explains everything. He goes on to explain that during certain moon phases, it was believed that dreams had predictive qualities. People would report what they saw in their sleep,
particularly on the 7th night after the new moon, and scholars would record these dreams beside lunar data. Over time, patterns emerged, or at least people believed they did. The frog, it turns out, wasn't just a frog. It was shorthand for change, for wet seasons arriving early, or for the rebirth of something thought lost. The mango signified a period of rest and abundance. The bent walking stick, well, that one still sparks debate. Some say it was an omen. Others just someone dreaming about their grumpy uncle. Not everything is a code, Abdu shrugs, but the act of writing it down makes it matter. You spend the rest of the afternoon in quiet observation. You're not watching the sky anymore, but the people. A woman adjusts a merchant's canopy just so, aligning its shadow with the corner of her stall. A boy stops mid-run to point at a crack in the clay wall where light now filters through, like moonlight, he says. An old man hums to himself as he stirs tea, tapping the spoon exactly 7 times before setting it down. You're beginning to realize that lunar observation here isn't always about spectacle. It's not just eclipses or harvest moons or red celestial dramas. Sometimes it's about repetition, rhythm, waiting for the moon to come back so you can check if she's still where you left her. And when she's not, well, that's where the real learning begins. As twilight settles in again, you return to the rooftop. The elder from the previous night is already there, this time placing 7 tiny shells in a circle around a bowl of water. You don't ask why. It feels like the kind of thing you're meant to watch quietly. Some people think astronomy is about looking far, but sometimes it's about looking close. So close, you see the moon in your soup. You glance at the bowl and smile. The water reflects nothing but a blur of cloud and dusk, but you know what he means. Here, in this world, the moon is both distant and deeply personal. A celestial body and a dinner guest. A traveler and a teacher. You don't need a telescope to study her. You just need patience, silence, and maybe a few dream frogs scribbled in the margins of your day.
The night has returned, and with it, the moon, this time a soft crescent reclining against the deep indigo of the West African sky. You lie on your back, belly full of millet stew, ears still ringing gently with the tones of the balafon played down the alley earlier. The air smells faintly of warm dust, palm oil, and crushed herbs. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena laughs. You try not to take it personally. Your companion tonight isn't the elder, or Abdu, but a young apprentice named Musa. He's no more than 14, still growing into his limbs, and speaks with a mixture of curiosity and pride that suggests he's memorized more than he's understood. But he's eager, and that counts. He's tracing the moon's arc with a stick in the dust beside you, mumbling under his breath. When you ask what he's doing, he says, "Practicing my shadow math." Shadow math. Now that's a phrase you weren't expecting. Apparently, one of the more unique traditions among lunar observers in this region involved measuring the length and angle of shadows during specific moon phases, not just to tell time, but to make predictions. Of what? That depends on the observer. Rainfall, mood swings, goat births, you name it. The idea was that lunar position affected not only light, but the behavior of all things bathed in that light. Historians still debate, Musa says, if shadow math had any basis in science or if it was just another superstition. But my grandfather says it helped him win a wrestling match once, so hard to argue with that kind of anecdotal data. The method is surprisingly intricate. You learn that the width of your own shadow during moonrise, if compared to the width of your hand, can be used to estimate not only the time, but also how far into the lunar cycle you are. Musa explains this with all the enthusiasm of a kid trying to impress his teacher, though his illustrations in the dirt leave something to be desired. Still, you admire the ingenuity. And it wasn't just humans who were believed to respond to the moon. You're told that herders, long before the existence of scientific studies, noted changes in the behavior of their livestock during different moon phases. Camels were reportedly more restless during waxing moons, and goats birthed more kids during waning ones. Whether there's truth in it or not, you're not sure. But it adds another layer to how people here have related to the moon, not as a distant object, but a local presence, one whose moods mirrored their own.
That belief, that the moon has moods, is a thread running deep through everything. The moon wasn't just an object, it was a being. Not necessarily a goddess or god, though those interpretations existed too, but something more ambiguous. Something that watched, remembered, responded. An entity that required respect. Musa recounts a story his mother told him about a man who insulted the moon during a dry season. That very night, his water jars mysteriously cracked, one by one. He left an offering the next morning, cola nuts and silence. In these stories, the moon is less a celestial rock and more a quiet neighbor, the kind who might eavesdrop through a cracked window, or turn away if you speak ill of them. And you begin to understand, in a sleepy sort of way, how the distinction between science and story here isn't rigid. It's soft, pliable, like clay that holds both water and fingerprints. Take, for example, the moon calendars Musa shows you, simple clay discs etched with cycles and signs. You count the marks with your finger. 28 in a ring, smaller circles at intervals. Every family has their own variation, Musa says. Some add charcoal marks to track rituals, others embed tiny stones to indicate important dreams or dates of birth. It's lunar science personalized, household specific. You ask whether there was ever a single official calendar. Musa shrugs. Maybe, maybe not, but even if there was, people would still make their own. That's how you remember what matters to you. That concept stays with you, that every household might interpret the sky differently based on their own rhythms, fears, and joys. It's an astronomy of the individual, not uniform, but intimate. Later, as you share a quiet bowl of warm rice and baobab sauce, Musa asks if people in your land also watch the moon. You pause. You think about phone calendars, tide charts, full moon parties, horror movie tropes. Then you say, yes, but maybe not like this. He grins, satisfied. Maybe one day we'll come visit your moon too. As the wind picks up and the embers of the cooking fire wink out one by one, you lie back again. The crescent moon now higher in the sky. It's thinner than you remember, or maybe you're just more aware. You track it with your eyes, watching as it flirts with the edge of a passing cloud. You think about frogs and mango dreams, about cracked water jars, and the patience it takes to watch something that moves so slowly you could miss it even while staring right at it. You feel, for the first time, like the moon isn't just above you, she's beside you. Not in a mystical way, but in a quietly companional one. Musa has already dozed off beside you, head resting on his folded robe. His shadow cast by the last ember lies across your feet. And just like that, without warning, a realization settles in your chest. You haven't looked at your own reflection in days. No mirror, no glass, no selfie, but somehow you feel more seen than ever.
Sleep doesn't come easily, not yet. But that's okay. You've got one more night here in the 12th century, under a sky so wide it feels like it could fold you up like a page and tuck you between the stars. Your host this evening is Fatimata, a seasoned weaver and widow, known for speaking her mind and chewing cola nut like it owes her money. She invites you into her quiet courtyard with little ceremony, points to a mat, and immediately asks, "You came all this way to learn about the moon, but have you listened to her yet?" You try to come up with a clever reply, but in the end you just say, "Not really." She nods like she expected that. Tonight, there are no elaborate tools or dramatic tales, no carved discs or equations drawn in the dust, just you, Fatimata, and the moon, which now hangs directly overhead, round, glowing, indifferent. Fatimata has no patience for star charts. My grandmother never read or wrote a thing in her life, but she knew the moon better than any scribe. Her moon wisdom, passed down by oral tradition, is quiet, practical. She speaks of what the moon does to cloth dye, how certain blues hold better under a waxing crescent, how a full moon can sour millet beer if you leave it uncovered, and how children born on the first night of a new moon often grow into travelers.
She huckles, whether these beliefs came from close observation or creative hindsight. Then she adds, doesn't matter. Either way, it teaches us to watch. And watching, really, is the point. She tells you how the moon helped her navigate grief. After her husband died, she says the moon kept her company every night for a month. Every time I looked up, it reminded me that something was still there, still rising, still changing, just like me. There's no drama in her voice, no poetic flourish, just a woman who watched the moon move through the sky and saw in it enough reason to get out of bed the next day. You ask if she still tracks the phases. She gestures to a string of knots near her door, one for each night. Some are tight, some loose. That's my lunar journal, she says. Tells me when I was angry, when I was peaceful, when I forgot to eat. You've seen parchment calendars, wax charts, carved ivory discs, but this string, it feels the most human of them all. Fatimata invites you to add a knot of your own. You hesitate, then tie a loose one. Tonight, after all, you feel at ease. She approves. Good. Now your story's in there too. The wind picks up. Overhead, the moon winks behind a fast-moving cloud. You ask her one last question. What do you think the moon wants? She chuckles. That's easy. For us to stop trying so hard to explain her and just pay attention. And you do. You listen. You breathe. You watch the way the moonlight plays on the rim of her water jar. You notice the owl's call in the distance. You feel the shift in temperature as night deepens. There's no great revelation, no final truth, just a sense that you're part of something far older than you and far more patient. Eventually, Fatimata settles into sleep, wrapped in a faded cloth the color of desert grass. You lie back on the mat, crickets humming in the silence between stories. The moon hovers above, whole and still. You think about all you've learned, about lunar tides and frog predictions, about string calendars and shadow math, about how knowledge can live in stories, in knots, in the passing glance between a mother and her child as they count days not in numbers, but in light. And as your thoughts stretch thin like fabric pulled by breeze, the weight of your own breath begins to slow. You feel it now, the stillness the moon brings. Not emptiness, but rest.
Let's slow things down now. Even more. Feel your body sink into whatever you're lying on. Bed, couch, maybe just the floor with a soft blanket. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath come and go without effort. There's nothing left to do tonight. Nothing more to learn. You've done enough. You've been enough. Let your mind drift back, gently, to that wide, starlit sky over 12th century West Africa, to the smell of wood smoke and crushed herbs, to the rustle of wind through woven cloth, the quiet voices of elders and apprentices and weavers, the way they tilted their heads toward the moon, not with answers, but with questions. You don't need to remember every detail, just the feeling of it, the curiosity, the calm, the sense of being part of something unspoken and ancient. Let that feeling wrap around you now, like soft cotton in the evening breeze. The moon is still there, after all. She hasn't gone anywhere. She watches over her side of the world while the sun rests. She'll trade places come morning. You don't need to worry about that. For now, let her keep watch. You're allowed to rest. In fact, you're meant to. So close your eyes if you haven't already. Breathe slowly. Drift. Float. The night is long, and you are safe.